Okay. Good. All right. Well, you know, I realized, especially when preparing an outline, that the arguments aren't necessarily that easy to follow all the time. Especially, some of the I want to avoid using the word reflexive because that's one of the
Mm,
theories that she develops, but a lot of the more kind of tricky elements involve going between like first person and third person views,
yeah.
moral theory, and there are a few other things that took me a while. Oh yeah, yeah, like the species and individual relation.
Hmm.
It took me a while to really flesh out what's at stake in those relationships and those uh, aspects of the theory. But I
Yeah,
think
the part
I
about the species reminded me of that scene in Inglorious Bastards. Have you seen where the dude is hiding Jews underneath the his house, and
yeah.
the Nazi
Well,
officer comes in, and
well, yeah, yeah. I mean, the Nazi at the door is a fairly typical
yeah,
trope, right? I mean,
yeah.
it's actually funny. In Kant, in the Metaphysics of Morals, the same kind of thought experiment takes place, but instead of it being a Nazi, because they didn't exist yet, it's an axe murderer. Um, so, yeah. In any case, what did you put here in the introduction? You want to walk me through it, and then we can compare our two
Yeah, I
different.
think basically in the introduction, I forget their name, the person who
Yeah,
wrote it, um,
O'Neill
but
is the last name, I think.
yeah, they're basically, kind of giving a summary of what Korsgaard is trying to do,
Yeah.
and basically trying to trace the source of norms,
Mhm.
and where does the force of ought come from,
Hmm.
um, and then the idea that we just don't merely have beliefs and desires and stuff. There's like a real force to them,
Hmm.
and then there are different schools of philosophies like voluntarism and realism, that have tried to attempt and explain where this normative force comes from, and how they have, in what ways they succeed and in what ways they fail, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you get a
Um,
fairly good overview of that in the first chapter as well. It's sort of interesting that the best written and I think most pleasurable part to read was the prologue.
yeah.
I thought it was really well written.
Mhm.
And then there's a little bit of excruciating detail in the first chapter.
Yeah.
Probably some things are a little bit redundant, maybe too. I'm not sure that she has to go through everything from quite as many different.
Thinkers.
Well, that's not really the problem. It seems like she repeats herself a lot.
Oh yeah.
Um, I mean, the chapter's like 50 pages long, and it could have
Right.
probably been about 40 or 30, 40
Hmm.
pages. But I guess it's kind of it's like the whatever, the main station that all the other chapters are going to come out of, so
Yeah.
so it's fine. Yeah. Well, why don't we jump into the prologue? It seems like maybe we could have a couple sessions just on this prologue and the first chapter because there's a lot of detail.
Oh yeah.
And as I said, some of the arguments or some of the descriptions of historical positions are fairly complicated and
Hmm.
not necessarily easy to, it's not necessarily easy to identify the various consequences that come out of certain positions just by reading over it. You have to think through them quite a bit, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you want to follow your outline, and then if there's something that maybe is missed, then I can just
Yeah, sure. That sounds
bring it
good.
from
That
like,
sounds
yeah,
good. I mean,
yeah,
um, maybe we could even today just kind of focus on the introduction. Although it's been
yeah.
now a while since I read the introduction, but
Mm,
I think that even there's a lot of stuff to work through. I mean, one of the things that's interesting has to do with our picture of the world that she calls something like the modern scientific worldview, all in capital words, capital letters,
yeah,
versus pre-modern, pre-scientific views on the world and the relationship between reality and goodness,
yeah.
and also the relationship between matter and form and reality, right?
Hmm.
So, do you want to say anything about that? The way that ideas. So, I mean, actually, we could get some columns going here, right? I mean, you've got something like form and
Hmm.
value, and
Hmm.
you've got matter and fact. And in
Yeah,
either case, there's a position on what is real. Pre-modern
right.
is in the form and value. Form and value is real from the pre-modern perspective, and fact and matter is real from the post-scientific modern worldview perspective. Um, and what that has to do with norms, normativity.
Yeah, yeah. I guess with the like in maybe Greek and like medieval systems of thought, um, just the idea of being moral and being excellent was enough to justify normativity, to be a good
Well,
person and
actually, I would
to.
check that word enough, first of all,
Mm,
right? Because it's not, it's true that it would be enough, provided you have an excellent telos.
hmm.
But it's not even so much that it would be enough, it's that it's possible at all,
Yeah.
right? Because the idea is that, I mean, from the Aristotelian perspective, right? From the Aristotelian perspective, to follow your own nature as the Greek term is megalopsychos, but
Mm,
it here I think it's translated as I mean, sometimes it's called the great souled person, someone with a great soul, or I have to find here how she translates it. Well,
mm,
actually, in my in my outline, I only wrote megalopsychos. But so there's an idea in Aristotle, in a bunch of different places, the politics, the Nicomachean ethics as well, that one idea in Aristotle is that everything in nature has a natural purpose.
hmm.
You may have heard of this before, right? I mean, like even on a physical level, the reason that rocks fall when you drop them, or that
Hmm.
fire goes up when you burn something, has
Hmm.
something to do with its natural purpose, its natural orientation or directedness.
Mm,
It's telos,
hmm.
right? And so, some things I can't remember every description here, but the idea is that there's some kind of natural way to be that you can get wrong,
Hmm.
right? So like if you ever hear someone use the term natural to describe something that happens and then they describe it as unnatural, they're actually coming from basically an Aristotelian point of view. Like if you say homosexuality is unnatural,
Hmm.
but from a scientific perspective, it happens, so it's natural.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to say that some practice is unnatural even though it happens? It's to
Mm,
say that there's some value-oriented way that is in the nature of, say, a human being or some other object, some other thing that is being violated.
right.
Okay, that's an Aristotelian picture. Now, Aristotle thinks that even among human beings, there are different natures, there are different, I guess it would be teloi for the plural, teloses. In fact, he even has an idea that being is not necessarily quite the same thing among different objects, different people, and so on. I mean, there is one ultimate being that I suppose is indivisible substance, but then it divides
Mm.
into different sorts of modes of being. Uh,
Yeah.
and the different modes of being are reflected in the difference in telos. So he actually describes some people as natural slaves,
Mm.
which is one of the more controversial elements today about Aristotle. And he describes other people that are not natural slaves, generally wealthy Greek males,
Hmm.
as having a telos of excellence.
Hmm.
Now, it doesn't mean, as I just tried to point out, that it's natural in the sense that it can't be violated, like the law of gravity or something.
Hmm.
Because you can violate your telos, but if you sort of follow the natural purpose of your existence, your telos, then you fulfill if you fulfill it, then you have reached an excellence with respect to your
Hmm.
telos.
Right.
So, Nietzsche, I don't remember where this is. It's in one of the aphoristic works. He quotes the poet Pindar, who says, "Become who you are."
Right.
Well, that's an Aristotelian idea, right? That is that
Hmm.
there's some um, unrealized essential feature of you that it's your duty to realize.
Yeah.
And so it is who you are, and yet you are not yet it.
Right.
Right. But that's the idea of the telos. Now,
Mm.
one of the things that's interesting about that is that there's this unity between nature and value, right? It is
Hmm.
in your nature to be an excellent person.
Yeah.
But excellence also means being the best version of what you naturally are.
Yep.
And that's something that in the post-scientific worldview is impossible.
Yep.
There is no way to get a gap between what naturally is the case and what actually happens,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because what naturally is the case is what is. There is no
Right.
difference, right? And that
Right.
has to do with what she says, anyway, is it has to do with this inversion on what we take to be more real, form or value, or matter or fact, right?
Hmm.
And the idea is that in Aristotle, our true nature, our telos, is in some respect kind of the form of what we truly are,
Yeah.
right? Like you as a moral, you know, courageous, virtuous person, that
Hmm.
is what your nature is, and you just have to
Hmm.
realize it at an excellent level. But the problem is that we're a combination of matter and form
Right.
because we have this excellence within us, and yet at the same time, we're also partially material, and there's something about material that resists form.
Right.
That form needs to somehow be brought under the control of,
Ah.
or matter has to be brought under the control of form.
Right.
And she talks about recalcitrant matter, right? The
Hmm.
idea that matter resists form. I think in my outline, I quote Kant, who has a similar idea, although he kind of um, this is from the World History from a Universal Perspective, that essay. He talks about he has this quote where he says, "From the crooked timber of humanity, nothing straight was ever made." It's on page 2 of my outline, I think, towards the top. So that and for Kant, I think that it's not really so much. Sometimes people object to that quote because they think that Kant is saying that you need to get rid of all difference in humanity, or you need to get rid of that
Mhm.
aspect of humanity that resists rational form or something like that. I don't take it to be what Kant is saying. I think what Kant is saying is it's a matter of fact
Mm.
that human beings have this value nature and have this fact nature,
Yeah.
or this form nature and this matter nature or whatever. And it's just a matter of fact. It's just a fact in the world that humanity is both crooked wood, like bent and
Hmm.
gnarly wood. And it's just a matter of fact that you can never make anything straight out of wood like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but
Yeah.
that's kind of the I don't know, the epic tragedy of human existence, right? That
Yeah.
we're both value and fact. We're
Right.
both matter and form, I think.
And the perceptive sense is, I read that like that's one of the reasons why we resist because of our perceptual apparatus or the way we sense things, and that causes illusions and
Yeah,
uh,
so she does come up with a slight distinction between Plato and Aristotle.
mhm,
I think for Plato, sense is an illusion. Sense uh, leads us astray, leads us in the wrong direction. It's more complicated for Aristotle because Aristotle does believe you can get knowledge through the senses.
mm,
But he also believes that we are fundamentally this combination of matter and form,
mhm,
right? Whereas Plato holds that we are fundamentally just form,
yeah.
right? And matter is really just an illusion, it's a lie, whatever you want to call
Mhm,
it.
mhm.
See if there's anything else here that any more details I want to bring out of this. But I mean, the very opening of the introduction, I think, is quite interesting as well, right? Because what she
Mm,
is talking about is also a fact of human consciousness. It's a fact of our experience of being in the world that we don't experience the world just as it is. We
mhm,
experience we do experience the world as it is, but also we experience the world as possibly being different. She says, basically that values are ways of imagining how things could be better, more perfect,
mhm.
or different, simply different. She talked
Yeah.
about this sense that we have that the world as it could be otherwise, the world that outstrips our experience,
Mm,
seems to call out to us. It's not just that we can imagine it as otherwise, it also calls out to us and demands that we make it otherwise,
yeah.
right? And she thinks that
Yeah.
that's pretty strange, and I agree. It is sort of a strange thing that we as human beings can't just take the world at face value.
Right. Yeah. Mhm.
I mean, even the thing that she mentions about, you know, if you draw two lines on a chalkboard, um, it almost seems like what you're seeing is that they're not equal.
Yeah.
But in order to see two lines as not quite equal requires imagining the world as otherwise than it is. There is no
Mhm.
way to imagine what it means for those lines to be equal in terms of mere facts.
Right. Just as it's presented, you need an idea of what equality is somehow.
Yeah, you need some kind of standard that is not
Right.
actually there in your
Right.
experience. I mean, I suppose even if they were mathematically equal, you wouldn't have, you wouldn't be able to say they're equal from a merely factual point of view. It still seems like you're saying, oh, they meet this standard that isn't actually there in what I see.
Yeah.
It's more obvious when they don't meet that standard. But I think even if they
Hmm.
do meet the standard, it's not literally there in what you
Yeah.
see. You just see a line of this length and then you see a line of this length.
Right.
But the sameness is something that we're bringing to experience, that idea of sameness, that idea of equality. Um,
Right.
you know, the idea that the world does not measure up, and it's our job to make it measure up to
Hmm.
our value-oriented ways of imagining the world.
Right.
What do you make of what Nietzsche has to say with respect to the bad conscience and obligation as the work of art? How is
Yeah, I think
obligation the work of art?
I don't was this from Genealogy of Morals or was it from I don't remember reading.
I think it's from genealogy. I think she probably
Okay.
gives the exact citation. We only read the first two essays from that anyway. We didn't read the third one, so maybe it's from the third one. I can't remember.
Yeah. Um no, I thought it was really interesting when it comes to sort of internalizing obligation or um, not resisting it and somehow using, well, overcoming resistance and using it for one's own benefit or the sort of overcoming or maybe self-discovery
Yeah.
and not painting it in a bad light, I guess.
Mhm. One thing that I forgot to mention about Aristotle, so I did say how you get value from the nature of people that have excellent natures.
Yeah.
But I did, there's one extra important thing which has to do with, well, what about everybody else who's a natural slave?
Hmm.
And for them, he says there's the law. There's
Right.
some kind of external imposition of value, imposition of form on those that don't naturally incline towards value.
Yeah.
And I think that that is something that Nietzsche's playing around with here, right? So
Right.
that there's a sense of cruelty, there's a sense of violence. Obviously, it's an external imposition rather than something that comes internally out of the nature of these people. But you're absolutely right that Nietzsche says that then it is internalized in a way.
Hmm.
But how does that make it artistic? What is artistic about that?
Mm. Well, I think maybe going back to that idea of not feeling oppressed um, and somehow converting, not even converting, I guess, because I think you just like accept this law without questioning it. Um, um, yeah, maybe in terms of like what you might gain out of it, or some sort of an external thing that might bring to your life or whatever. You just like accept it because it's the law, and that's the motive, because it's a requirement. Um,
Mhm. I mean, we could
so.
even probably, I think, I don't remember how much you remember about especially the first essay in Genealogy of Morals, but
Mhm.
to a certain extent, this quote gives us a little bit of the structure of his argument there, right? This idea of um, the transvaluation of values,
Mhm.
right? And you're at a good starting point to kind of see the connection, but this idea that there is an external situation that you could either just accept or somehow transform to make it your own.
Mhm.
How does that work here? In
Mhm.
what sense is transforming some external situation such that you're the one that makes it valuable for you in your way? How is that artistic? How does that have to do in the example of, say, like the slaves and the masters and so on in genealogy? Um, you think you can flesh that out at all?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to think how it's artistic. I mean, I can.
Well, the thing to remember, and I mean, it's been like 2 or 3 years since we read that,
Yeah.
but it's such a central work in moral theory that it's probably good to come back to it quite often. In any case, I mean, there's the there's the 3-minute YouTube version of it that people like Andrew Tate or like Joe Rogan or whatever are
uh,
probably familiar with. And then
sure.
there's something closer to the actual version, which involves all sorts of reversals.
Mhm.
So I mean, you probably could give me the 3 minute version, right? Between the slaves. How does morality come about on the first level? There's the masters that don't really think. There's no difference in the master's mind between goodness understood in terms of what is the case and what ought to be the case. Because what it means to
Yeah.
be good is just to be strong, to get what you want.
Yeah.
Um, some people aren't able to get what they want, but the masters don't really care about that. It's bad
Right.
for the people that can't get what they want. And
Right.
so there you can already start to see this element of desire, wishing that the world were different than it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it only comes from the oppressed,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because the masters have everything they want and don't think about the world as it could be otherwise. They just do what they want.
Yeah.
And then how does the first step of the transvaluation of values work?
Mm.
The oppressed look at the world and how do they evaluate it?
They see that there's a stronger authority that's better than them,
Hmm.
and one way of maybe overcoming their position is adapting the master's way of being,
They do what to the master's way of being?
adapting,
Adapting. Well, but yeah, okay, but
or,
how do they
or,
adapt?
or like learning.
Well, just look at the word there, transvaluation. It
Hmm.
means there's some kind of reversal or some kind of switching,
Yeah,
right?
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Uh-huh. Oh, so is it where they kind of sort of like grassroots movement or something where the we get together and um, evaluate what's going on to try to overthrow the
Well, that's a bit
master?
a bit further down the line, but I mean,
Yeah.
the first step is first of all, the way that Nietzsche begins that argument is to say, so first of all, Nietzsche is a philologist. He
Mm,
is interested in the way that words come about from their etymological history, right? And
mm,
so one of the things he says is, um, you've got this word good that has two different opposites.
mm-hmm,
One opposite of good is bad, but another opposite of good is evil.
mm,
So there's got to be something that um, uh, I'll say it this way: there's not a single thing that good means. If good can have two opposites, then it has to have two meanings,
mm-hmm,
right? And so that's the first step. And then he also, this is much more obvious in German, but if you look at the etymology of bad in English, I don't know how far this goes in other languages, but it works in German and English. If you look at the etymology of the word bad, in German it's schlecht, but schlecht is related to a word that means something like simple or poor or just not very. I guess simple is the best word. Schlicht is the word.
mm-hmm,
And from that perspective, he says, well, look, you've got good, which is understood in a purely material sense. People as organisms like to reproduce, they like to exert their power, their will, they like to get what they want,
yeah.
etc. And some people aren't able to do that. They're not able to have that kind of material opulence or something. And so they're kind of simple, poor, whatever, but
Mm,
that's purely material. It's not
mm-hmm,
evaluative in any normative sense. Right.
mm,
It's simply that some people get what they want and some people don't get what they want. And there's a fact of the matter that DNA makes us want certain things and we do it. And when you do what DNA commands, that's good.
yeah.
And when you can't do what DNA commands because you're too weak, that's bad. But it's not
Mm,
evil. It's not
uh-huh.
evil, right?
Right.
Now, how does evil come about? And that's
Mm,
where the reversal starts,
mm,
right? So that the people that are bad, they can't get what they want, they look at themselves as good,
good. Uh-huh. Right.
and look at the people that call themselves good in that material sense as evil,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And
mm.
that's where normativity comes about,
Yeah,
right? At least
right.
in this kind of mythic history of it, because there is a fact of the matter that on some level, some material level, the slaves in Nietzsche's account, the people that are weak, wish that they could get what they want on a material level. But
Yeah,
then, in calling what you want on a material level, because they're not able to get it and they see other people that are able to get it, in calling that evil, what you've just done is split your subjectivity between the material and the formal part,
value.
or the fact part and the value part, right?
Yep. Yeah, yeah,
Because you
yeah,
say, yes, it's true materially that I want to do all the things the masters are doing,
yeah.
but I also have some other kind of desire. Well, actually, I think Nietzsche would have to say, that other desire to be good in the moral sense actually only comes out of the kind of resentment of seeing that other people get what they want and you don't get what you want on a material level. So you've got to invent some other higher thing that you want,
Ah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, now it's kind of becoming clear, like, just, I don't know, movies like Gladiator or something where you see like the super poor who are
Hmm.
being fed like what are the leftovers, and they
Yeah.
see the stronger, they don't like really abhor them or anything. They just kind of, their expressions and stuff, it's almost like it's matter of fact.
Yeah, or
Like,
even the
this is our
fact that
position.
the gladiators are fighting to the death while the emperor is like, eating a big chicken leg or something.
Yeah,
It's like, oh yeah, there's some entertainment out there. I mean,
yeah,
for them it's life and death, but for me it's
yeah,
entertainment, whatever,
right.
yeah, I mean that's kind of the world picture. But I think the most important thing there is that so like the Joe Rogan version of it is like, oh yeah, people actually just um, are material. They just do what DNA commands, and some people are too weak to do what DNA commands, and so they resent that, and then they take it out on the people that are strong. But that's not the whole
Hmm.
story in Nietzsche, because the most important thing here is there's an act of creation
Hmm.
in imagining a new set of values,
Yeah.
right? It's completely something that is invented.
Hmm.
Now, one could make the argument that at least in the sort of first level, maybe it isn't. I think on the first level, it's therapeutic because it feels good to think of yourself as good, even though you can't get what you want on a material level, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but then it sort of becomes this whole, worldview, this whole metaphysics and everything, right? And I think somewhere down the line, it becomes oppressive.
Hmm.
But uh, separate from all of that, just as a sort of uh, factual description, there's something deeply creative about that.
Yeah.
Something deeply artistic about looking at the world as it is and inventing a completely virtual world, a
You're right.
virtual world of values,
Right.
right? And that's
Yeah.
the artistic move.
Hmm.
Now,
Hmm.
we still haven't quite expressed it in terms of internalizing the law. Maybe you can run with that a little bit. How does that involve internalizing? You could say internalizing the law or internalizing coercion, or uh, internalizing this imposition of form.
Hmm.
One could say, perhaps. I mean, I think to a certain extent, it's a little bit different we don't want to get to law just yet because law is already normative.
Yeah.
But we want to somehow build something like law out of this creative way of imagining a different set of values.
Yeah. Um, so the way I understand it is like the internalization is sort of, the root of it is coming from like the agent's own will or
Hmm.
something like that. Where the force of, let's say, obligation or whatever it is not external, but it's like sort of created internally, from like the first person perspective. And it is like what you want and what you think
Hmm.
is right. And um,
Can I suggest that maybe go back even one more step? Because like one thing that I wrote here in the outline is this internalizing of that external imposition of the good, right? That
Mhm.
internalization of coercion or whatever. I mean, one thing that's artistic about it is that it's a sort of self-overcoming, a sort of
Mhm.
self-form, I suppose even a self-formation.
Mm.
I think actually those are two different steps. There's self-formation, there's obligation is self-formation. And I think derivative from that is the idea of self-overcoming. But in both cases, you have to have the invention of the self.
Mhm.
And that's another creative move. How do you get the
Mm.
invention of the self from the transvaluation of values? Right? And it has to do with this ought versus is situation,
Uh-huh.
right? The masters are pure is, there is no ought.
Right. Right.
But
Right. Right.
the slaves in flipping the value system now have created the possibility of a world that is different from what is. And
Right.
that's where the self comes in. In
Mm-hmm.
flipping it, in creating the ought, you have also created the concept, the notion of the self.
Right.
At least in this sort of,
And
maybe kind of Western. I don't know if it's just Western. I mean, because when we were looking at like Atman and all that kind of stuff, it seems like
Mhm.
this works for that too. But in any case, how does imagining the world not just as it is, but both as it is and how it could be otherwise, how does that create the conditions for the notion of a self?
Yeah, that's interesting because it seems like there wasn't that notion wasn't there prior, um when they saw the world as being just as is.
Hmm.
And so this art sort of demands a creation of a new self, or let's say creation of a self that's different from the one it was.
Hmm.
um
Yeah, there's kind of a slogany way to talk about the absence of the self in, say, the Homeric world in, my goodness, sorry, I had a phone call. There's a way of thinking about the notion of the self in the Homeric world, which is,
mm,
the masters and all this. The slogan version of it is, "You are what you do." There is no
mm,
gap between what you do and who you are or what you
mm,
are. But
mm.
on the slave view, on the uh, transevaluated world,
Yeah,
there is a gap between who you are essentially and what you do.
yeah.
And in the Christian tradition, that's called sin,
Mm-hmm.
right? That sin means you are somehow violating
Who you are.
your nature as, a child of God or something like that, which is to
Right.
say that um, if if I do something wrong, like, especially something that comes out of the instincts that DNA instills in me, if I am really angry and I kill my enemies, or I go around doing all sorts of things that we would call horrible, like raping, murdering, all this stuff, but I'm simply being driven like an animal to act in a certain way. It can only be a sin if I could have done otherwise, right? In other words, if you think that your nature is not to go around murdering and raping and stealing and all this kind of stuff that would feel good to do in lots of situations, then there's some way of describing who you are that is separate from the actions that you carry out,
Yeah.
right? And that
Yeah.
that is the only way that you can get a notion of evil or a notion of sin or something like this. There's got to be some nature that you're violating, which means that
Right.
activity is separate from who you essentially are.
Right.
And so it's at that moment that you get a notion of the self. by imagining the world otherwise than it is, imagining you as existing in a way otherwise than how you are actually acting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Mm. I feel, I mean, not to jump ahead, but the part where she talks about explanatory adequacy and justificatory
hmm
adequacy,
hmm
seems like this has the explanatory adequacy, but not the justification side.
That's right. So the be or rather you are what you do is explanatory. It's not
Yeah.
exactly like an explanation because like what does that even mean? But
Yeah.
right. The basic mood of that is that it's an explanation. There are scientific ways that we could describe why organisms act in a certain way, and there's something
Hmm.
kind of basically deterministic about it. But it's not a justification because we should work through there step by step. But the idea is that justification involves looking at what your motivations are and either wishing that they weren't your motivations or endorsing your
Hmm.
motivations. So
Hmm.
to endorse your motivations is to justify them,
Hmm.
right? That is like, I guess if you had a master morality, a very unreflective morality, where whatever you do is the correct thing to do, then you would look at maybe a scientific description of DNA making me go and kill my enemies and steal what I want and rape whoever I want or whatever. If you affirm that, then your moral theory is like a complete materialistic moral theory. To a certain extent, it almost seems like it's self-undermining because the very definition of normativity seems to suggest that it can be wrong. You can make
Hmm.
mistakes, you can violate
Right.
your nature or whatever the norm is. And if you were like a complete determinist, physicalist, whatever, master, uh, if your moral theory were a were the master's moral theory, there would be no way to get it wrong
You're right.
because you simply do what you do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Hmm.
But I do want to flesh out the creativity aspect
Yeah.
because I think it's interesting. I mean, creativity, we've already seen a few different places that the creation of morals, the creation of normativity is actually an artistic project. One, it's imagining the world as otherwise than it actually is. And that's like, I think, a necessary condition for art. You have to imagine something that doesn't exist yet.
Right.
Right. But also as regards the creation of the self,
Hmm.
right? Your own self as an artistic project is
Yeah.
something that comes out of this way of flipping the values between what is the case and what should be the case, even though it's not. And
Yeah.
then I suppose the next aspect there is that once you've sort of created this notion of the self, you
Hmm.
have this idea of self-overcoming, right?
Hmm.
That on a first level, I suppose, is just material. You want to overcome your material self.
Hmm.
But I suppose as you get better at overriding your material desires, you would start to think about different ways you can overcome your maybe your biases, your wrong ideas, these sorts of things. And so it develops into
Hmm.
sort of spiritual self-overcoming from simply a material self-overcoming, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
We've covered most of the stuff from um, Plato, Aristotle, Christianity. Um, I mean, we've already said a couple words about why that worldview, according to Korsgaard, doesn't work anymore. The idea of excellence, following your nature, why that doesn't work. But would you like to say anything more about that?
Uh, no, that's the shift, right, to this modern scientific worldview where
hmm
um, the emphasis is on matter and fact, and that human action is really indifferent, just like nature.
hmm
And then values are imposed by us.
Hmm.
Um, and it's, yeah, like an act of creation.
Hmm. I'm just kind of looking at the end of this where I say Kant, art, and the imposition of
Oh,
form.
yeah.
And I want to see if there's any detail. She doesn't talk about Adorno, but it did kind of remind me of Adorno and the relationship between
Mm.
normativity and art. So let's look at this. I can't quite remember what I wrote, so maybe it won't be interesting, but let's look. Uh, so reason, which is in the Kantian picture, it takes the place of form, is not found in the world, right? So yeah, she does say this, which is interesting, which is that part of what makes that reversal so strong, the reversal
Mm.
between what is most real, say, form or matter, fact, or rather value or fact, has to do with this idea that in calling the world as we encounter it material, in calling the world as it really is a collection of matter, form then is no longer found in the world, it's imposed on the world.
Hmm.
So that's the Kantian move, right? Where it's like, well, are forms really out there in the Platonic sense, or are forms something that we are maybe creatively bringing to our awareness of the world,
Hmm.
something that we impose on the world, right? And
Yeah.
so that's a way of describing why it's not possible to let nature produce value,
Hmm.
right? Because we don't believe that matter is inherently good or not good on the scientific worldview. It just is.
Right.
Um, but at the same time, we have this strong desire for, this strong sense that we need value, we
Hmm.
need form. And if it can't be found in the material world, it's something that we have to bring, we have to impose
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
on the world. Uh, then I wrote a little thing about Adorno, but I don't remember what's going on here. Art imagines the world otherwise than as it is. That's one important element. But it also gives the lie to idealized pictures of reality. And that's an important move that I don't think she really mentions here that is true about Adorno, right? That it's one thing that we could think is that, okay, so the world as it is kind of sucks. The wrong people are in power, bad things happen all the time. And we could say, okay, well, then it's art's job to imagine a perfect world.
Hmm.
And that's maybe closer to an Aristotelian perspective, perhaps, depending on what details you want to focus on in Aristotle. But, it could be that the only thing that art needs to do is give us a picture of what the world would look like if it weren't bad, if things weren't just bad. But that's not what
Right.
Adorno thinks either. It's true that the world is bad, and it's true that art imagines the world as otherwise than it is, but also it shows that idealized pictures of the world as it ought to be are also false.
Right.
Um, and so, when he's talking about the necessary condition of truth is to be found in giving voice to suffering that
Mm.
evades concepts, in negative dialectics. I think what he's saying is that art both gives voice to suffering, that the suffering of the world as it is, because it's
Hmm.
unfair, bad things happen. But because it imagines the world not in a conceptual way, but in an expressive way, not in a
Hmm.
way that tells us exactly what things need to be in place in the world for it to be ideal, but rather it simply gives voice to a suffering that probably can never be resolved. It shows us that both that the world as it is false, but also that any um, superficial ideal picture that we might try to create is also false. I suppose that suffering is a primitive fact of human experience.
Right. In
Um,
that sense, yeah.
and so I think that that's an interesting twist on it, right? I think to a certain extent, It's sort of interesting because, like, when you read a work like this that goes through all these different theories of normativity, these different ethical positions, and so on. Um, so you read this one, and she actually has a positive position, and then you go and you read the next work that objects to everything that she says and has a really
Yeah.
persuasive argument, and then you go and read the next one that has
Hmm.
more objections and another persuasive argument. You can kind of get the sense that it's kind of a futile project,
Hmm.
that maybe thinking about normativity, thinking about the world as it ought to be in these ethical terms is kind of a fool's errand just because you're never going to get resolution beyond. I mean, the sort of resolution you get, and this is something that she says about moral realism, the resolution you get is that it might make you more confident in what you already believe anyway,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
But that doesn't show you that what you believe is true,
Yeah.
right? And I think that this notion that Adorno is bringing up is that, well, maybe that impossibility of resolution is a primitive fact of human consciousness, human experience in the world. And if you're trying to positively articulate it in a moral theory, it's going to fail. But one way that you can positively articulate it is in art that gives voice to suffering.
Yeah.
Because there, it is a positive articulation because you are creating a work of art that quote
Right.
unquote says something.
Yes.
I mean, if you're doing it only through concepts, only through moral theories, then the best you can do is negate. You can't affirm. You can say this moral theory is bad, 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 but it's not really clear that you've said anything positive.
Hmm.
And perhaps on Adorno's picture, the only way that you can say something positive is on a conceptual level, not to say anything at all, but simply
Mm.
to say something on an expressive level through an artwork that doesn't say things that are true or false, but simply expresses
Yes.
in a powerful way this sense of lack of fit, lack of resolution.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would
That's
be to
interesting.
take the artistic idea to one of its conclusions, maybe the trajectory through Nietzsche to Adorno. It's perhaps not the only way
Yeah.
to think about it. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh no. No, nothing. I think I yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we should look at chapter one a little bit. You want to jump
Yeah.
into chapter one? So I think it'd be good, if possible, to try to sketch out um, the 40,000 foot view of this
Yeah.
argument because it's easy to get lost in the details.
Yes. Yeah.
And also, I've read the second chapter as well. I haven't read chapters
Mhm.
three and four yet, but she kind of gives a hint as to where she's going, but she only develops about half of her argument in chapter one.
Mm.
And it's actually the destructive part of the argument. She's saying why voluntarism and realism are false.
Uh-huh.
And she hasn't given her constructive view yet that involves reflexive endorsement and autonomy as
Right. That's
trying
the
to say.
Kantian
Yeah. So
part.
it's maybe hard to get the full picture of why she gives us all this detail, where it's going, what the plan
Yeah.
is. But I think we can try to do that. And if you get a picture of that, it'll be much easier to follow the argument, to understand why she's dwelling on certain details and so on.
Mhm.
What have you got so far? What do you think is the point of chapter one? And again,
Um,
try not to start at the ground level of details. Try to start
yeah.
at the big picture.
Yeah. Um, I think her project in this chapter is to show that both voluntarism and realism fail the test of uh, normativity.
Hmm.
And um,
Well, one thing we could maybe try to start doing, I think actually, you can kind of see the basic picture of the argument in the introduction or the prologue, the stuff that we were just talking about. I can't remember if it's
Hmm.
the prologue or the introduction. But in any case, you already brought up something that was really important, this idea of the distinction between explanation and justification, which is already there
Right.
in the,
Yeah.
I guess it's the prologue. But, see how much you can connect the first 5 pages, the prologue, to what you think the larger scale argument might be. And it's true that it involves a rejection of realism and voluntarism,
Yeah.
but that's not really the most basic objective.
Yeah. 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 So if we go back to like the DNA example, or even just like an evolutionary theory of, let's say, human nature or morality, there is still a possibility where let's say, there's some sort of an action that I'm doing where I know that, okay, let's say if I believe in the evolutionary theory or something, that like, okay, maybe I'm doing this because this theory is true, but at the same time, I could also feel like, well, that's not what I want. Like, I
Mm,
want to do this other thing,
mm,
but maybe because I think this theory is true, I'm going to do it that way anyway. And so there, it seems like it gets shaken up a little bit.
mhm,
Um, um, and um, and I think that's where like the justification adequacy
mhm,
comes into play, because I can explain, well, I'm doing this because it's human nature, or evolution has programmed us to behave this way, but I could also do otherwise.
mhm. Yeah, I mean the ability to endorse what you're doing anyway or not endorse it
Hmm.
is bound up with justification. It's also bound up with the notion that there's some aspect to your own selfhood that is separate from what you're doing,
Yeah.
right? Because if you couldn't even conceive of the world as um, something other than what is actually happening, you couldn't endorse or not endorse. You would simply do it.
Right.
But it's this extra ability to take a step back from what you're doing and
Right.
reflect on it and think, I'm glad I did that, or I wish that I didn't have to do that. I mean, you could even imagine a situation like a really fundamental, primitive kind of ethics where you can't change what you do, but you can, at the very least, um, affirm or reject what you do on a kind of
Hmm.
emotional level,
Hmm.
right? Like if you were some kind of amoeba that had an ethical sentiment or something, you could know that no matter what, when the food is there, you're going to go for the food. No matter what, you're going to divide, reproduce, or whatever under whatever conditions. And yet, if you're slightly more advanced than an amoeba, you could kind of feel bad about that,
Yeah.
even though you can't change it.
Hmm.
Right. So that's one level of imagining the world as otherwise, getting a split in the self.
Hmm.
Right. Um, the split in the self is going to be part of her answer to where normativity comes from. Um,
Hmm.
we're not really doing this in a linear way, but the split in the self will have to do with the legitimacy of authority. Uh,
Hmm.
maybe I should give you just my take on the big picture, the big argument that she's going to bring here. So essentially, we start in the prologue with her talking about how you've got form, which is how things should be, their perfect nature or their perfect status or something, and matter, which somehow resists form. And
Hmm.
we also find that in the post-scientific world, we believe that matter is real, and yet we still have this desire for form. And
Hmm.
since matter is real and can't produce form on its own, we impose form on
Hmm.
matter, on the material world. We look for value in the world. We don't find it coming from matter directly, so we impose value on the world.
Hmm.
When Nietzsche talks about, we are the ones that make the world valuable. It's the same basic
Right.
idea, right? Value doesn't exist out there in the world. We make the world valuable in terms of what we do, what we want to do, etc. Okay, so this element of imposition, this element of coercion is really important. And then she goes
Mm-hmm.
through a few different perspectives that she thinks get the answer right in a certain way and get it wrong in other ways. One of the first places that she looks, voluntarism, has this element of authority in it, but the authority is completely external,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, I don't know how much uh, familiarity you have with Hobbes and the state of nature,
Mm.
Leviathan, and so on. Are you familiar at all?
Not really. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the basic picture, Hobbes was one of the first social contract theorists,
Mm.
which means that he basically thought that this is where ethics, this is where normativity comes from. At some like prehistoric level that he calls the state of nature.
Mm.
Everybody is kind of looking for their own self-interests, but because you've got these competing self-interests between individuals, they're constantly at war with each other.
Mm.
And he says that in the state of nature, life is nasty, brutish, and short.
Mm.
Now, one of the things that these warring factions find is that if it's a zero-sum game all the time, everybody ends up with zero
Yeah.
over, long enough of a time. And so that situation gradually gives way to a situation in which perhaps one faction is able to gain a little bit more dominance than the others and becomes more powerful than the others, but
Mm.
is not completely powerful because they still have to avoid being overthrown by everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a situation where now you have the vast majority of people, but you've also got one person or one faction that is more powerful, that is able to sanction the other people,
Mm-hmm.
that is able
Mm-hmm.
to lay down laws on those people, becomes an external authority,
Yeah.
essentially, right? And she thinks that that's where normativity comes from.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things she says is it's not that the king, the sovereign, the authority actually determines what is good and what is evil, what is right, what is not right. The only thing that the authority does is provide the force to do what
Right.
the law commands.
Right.
So Hobbes has a theory for what makes a law good versus what makes a law not good,
Mm.
and we can talk about that in a moment. But the main thing is that the authority enable in having the power to lay down law on everyone else creates a situation where people not only can recognize what is good, but they're also motivated to do what is good. The authority is
Yeah.
kind of like the executive function in moral deliberation. I mean, one thing that if you look at Kant that is fairly easy to recognize is that if you think that morality, what is good and what is not good, is something you can arrive at by thinking about it rationally, that's not enough to explain why we do it.
Yeah.
Right? That why we do it, so I could, as a mathematical problem, come to some rational explanation of what is good and what is not good, and so on a moral
Mm-hmm.
level. But as she says, people don't live and die for correct mathematical solutions,
Yeah.
right? What is this living and dying force, right? What is
Right.
this force to a rational calculus about what is right and what is wrong? And she thinks that
Yeah.
that force can only come from authority, from laying
Right.
down the law. And the reason that authority can produce that force is that the authority is able to punish,
Right. That's
is
the
able to coerce, is able to sanction, is the word
yeah.
that she
Sanction. Yeah.
uses a lot. And that's the basic form. Now, what's wrong about that picture is this idea that um, uh, external authorities are the explanation for normative force.
Yeah.
He thinks that, and maybe at a certain historical period, I mean, you could say that it is a historical fact that, you know, I'm sure there are lots of exceptions to this at various points in history, but I suppose until the Enlightenment, most authorities had complete control and could kill whoever they wanted and so on. So it's sort of interesting, however, in Hobbes says that the sovereign, the authority, has complete power over everyone, and no one has any rights. They have to follow what the law of the
Mm,
sovereign is. Um,
mm,
However, there is one right that everybody has that the sovereign can't take away, and that is self-defense.
mm,
Everyone has a basic primitive right to preserve themselves.
mm,
And
mm,
and so that gets a little of the motor for a actual society that's based on that relationship into
mm.
motion, right?
Yeah.
That the sovereign can't just do whatever they want. There are other
Right.
reasons too. I mean, Hobbes says that actually what makes a law good is not just the will of the sovereign.
Mm.
What makes a law good is that it actually has material goodness. It furthers the interests of
The people.
the people that are subject to the law, basically, right?
Mhm,
And that's what
mhm.
would make it good. But this idea of force is something that comes out of the will of the sovereign.
Right. And she also
So,
says
yeah.
that the sovereign is not required to invoke the content of morality,
Mhm.
and but just lay down the law. And um,
Yeah, well, I maybe invoke isn't quite the right word. I think that the sovereign doesn't determine the content
mm,
of morality. The sovereign
mhm.
simply, calls out the army when people break the law, you know.
Yeah.
So that's the basic picture. And then what she thinks is a more adequate answer to what normative force is has a lot to do with what Nietzsche has to say with this internalization of an external state of affairs. I mean, in
Mm,
Hobbes and voluntarism, that authority, that coercion is all external.
mhm,
But she thinks that in reflexive endorsement and in autonomy, it becomes internalized.
mhm.
What would an internal version of that external authority look like, do you think?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I was just thinking about like the kind of different identities that one takes. Like let's say if I'm like talking, if I'm hanging out with my parents, or if I'm like in the university, or if I'm just alone with by myself or with my friends, there are these different identities that I have that sort of are authoritative and
Hmm.
that kind of tell me this is how I need to be in this scenario and this scenario and this scenario.
Hmm.
Um, and Yeah, so what was the question again?
Okay. So first of all, maybe you can just summarize everything I said about the way that she talks about Hobbes and voluntarism, this idea that normativity comes out of an external authority in
Yeah.
Hobbes. Can you summarize that kind of stuff first? And then the question is, what would the internal version of that look like?
Mm, okay, so basically we need an external sovereign to lay down the law, because otherwise it would be just like chaos, and people are just going to be motivated by their self-interests. And yeah, and then so having this obligation come from an external place will um, maybe keep the society more in order, and so on and so forth. Okay. And then so now to flip that, and if because I can still let's say get away with the crime, and if I don't get punished, then it's not a crime at all. So in that case, I've sort of um, maybe like yeah, then there's no obligation either, right? Because
Okay,
of
that's true. That's a little bit more detailed than we want right now. That
yeah.
is one of the objections that she brings to both. She's talking about realism at that point, but she
Mm,
says that Hobbes has an objection to or a reply to the realist's objection but that Hobbes' reply doesn't work either because, as you were saying, it comes down to what we mean by irresistible power. But let's not worry about that yet.
Yeah.
Let's still try to
So,
stay kind of general. I mean, I think you're thinking a little too. You don't even have to think about what she says. Think for yourself,
mm,
right? Like,
mm,
I mean, I think when we were talking about Nietzsche, you were able to follow that quite well, right? This idea of internalizing some kind of coercion, right?
mhm,
Some kind of thing that this imposition of form on the world, internalizing that into yourself. I mean, one way to think
mhm.
about it is that, I mean, you can just sort of try to translate the terms, right? You've got this authority in the
Yeah.
external world, the king.
Yeah.
What does it mean to have a split in your own consciousness between the king and something other than the king? What is the king part of your consciousness versus the
Mm,
non-king part of your consciousness? What does that mean?
right. So there's a split in the self, um, and yeah. So the authority is like in me, right? It's
Hmm.
internal. Um, yeah. Okay. And so maybe that authority is like the more excellent form of myself.
Perhaps, although
Yeah.
she might still think that the authority doesn't determine the content. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
even in the internalized version, we can't immediately think that the authority is the more excellent part of yourself.
Right.
It's just the
Uh-huh.
capacity, it's just the ability to lay down a standard, whatever
Right.
the standard is. We don't know, we don't worry about the content of the standard. It's just
Right.
the mere ability at all to lay down a standard for yourself.
Right.
That's the authority.
Uh-huh. And is and maybe that's also reason.
Well, reason's tricky because reason certainly determines the content of a
Mm-hmm.
moral claim. And as I was trying to point out with Kant, you can reason yourself to what is right and what is wrong, but you still have to do it.
Yeah.
And that ability to do what you've
Mm-hmm.
reasoned yourself to is the authority.
Mm-hmm.
That's why in the groundwork, Kant, the very first thing he says in the groundwork is the only absolutely good thing is the goodwill.
Mm.
Because even the capacity to reason to what you ought to do doesn't guarantee that you're going to do it. In fact,
Yeah.
even the ability to like execute the program.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think of a rational theory about what is right is like a
Mm-hmm.
program, but you still have to run the program.
Yeah.
The running of the program is the authority, it's the executive.
Yeah.
You've got to somehow explain how you get from the program to behavior in the world, right? Because the rational theory is
Mhm.
just a program. It doesn't do anything. But morality isn't just a program, it's about how you act in the world.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
so the authority that you internalize is that capacity to do what you ought to do.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that force come from? You can reason yourself to it, but that doesn't explain why we actually act on that way. And not just act on that way here or there, but act on that way on pain of death, right?
Yeah.
That's what she's talking about.
Right.
Why do we force ourselves to suffer the consequences of acting on our morals?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we've identified the authority that's internalized. What we haven't
Yeah.
identified is how that authority gets its power.
Yeah. Yeah.
The authority is simply the executive function, the ability to act on the program.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to know not just like, how does it get its power to execute,
Yeah.
right? And you can go back to this idea that I said before, punishment,
Mm.
sanction. This
Mm.
is something that she thinks that Hobbes gets right, It's wrong
Mm-hmm.
because of how it's externalized and so on, but
Yeah.
it's right in the sense that authority doesn't get its power because it determines what's right and wrong. It gets its power from the ability to punish for failing to do what's right or doing what's wrong,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so
Yeah.
what would an internal version of that look like? I mean,
Mm.
obviously, in the
Mm.
external perspective, it's like they bring out the army and they kill you or they put you in jail or something like that. But what does the internal version of that look like?
Guilt.
Okay, and what is guilt? And you're talking about this split in the self when you're hanging out with
Mm-hmm.
your parents or as a university student or whatever. How does that
Mm-hmm.
have to do with the capacity of guilt to
Come
I
into
mean,
the
what is
picture
guilt?
or
And let me just ask the question. What's the relationship between guilt and who you take yourself to be?
right, right. Um, yeah. Well, I think I have a sense of who I am, like a very close, deep sense. And when I do something that does not align with that, then I feel guilty or these other bad feelings,
Hmm.
right?
And why does that feel bad?
Because it has the sort of authoritative force
No,
or
no, sort of. That's the punishment part of it.
right, right, right. Um,
One of the things she says is that the only, maybe this isn't true, but she says it more or less like this. The only way that we could explain that people are willing to die for their moral values is
mhm.
that they think that the alternative is to suffer a fate worse than death.
Uh-huh.
So, how does your identity and perhaps the loss of your identity, how does that play a role? Is loss of your identity a fate worse than death?
Like okay, yeah. Okay, so is the loss of identity equal to facing death, right? That's what you're
Not
asking.
only equal, but is it worse than death? Because I
Worse than
guess,
death,
if
right?
you're gonna be like completely kind of mechanical about it,
Yeah,
if losing your identity were exactly as bad as death, then you
right.
wouldn't be able to decide what to do. So losing your identity has to be worse than death.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's the punishment
Right.
of the moral authority that you've internalized. The
Uh-huh.
moral authority is the power to act on the program that you've determined is right. But
Mm-hmm.
it only gets its force by virtue of the fact that if you don't, that part of yourself will recognize that it has died, it has lost itself. And
Mm.
that's much worse than just mere physical death.
Yeah,
I think that's the idea. That's the psychology that she's bringing here.
I see.
Right.
Yeah,
And, and
yeah.
and so everything that she says about Hobbes, it's easy to read that and think that it's irrelevant or that Hobbes's picture is just doesn't make any sense because like
Mm.
a king that has complete control is a complete tyrant. It's hard to see how that could have anything to do with morality.
Mm-hmm.
What she's saying, however, is that the tyrant aspect of the king, what is normative about it isn't the content. It's not that the king punishes you. Like you look at Donald Trump or something and you think like he seems completely immoral. She would
Mm-hmm.
agree, but that's only on the level of the content of the
Mm-hmm.
moral claims. What makes the authority a moral force is precisely its ability to motivate us,
Yeah,
right? To motivate us on pain of some kind of punishment.
yeah.
And in her psychological picture of it, it's a punishment worse than death, losing what you take to be your most important identity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in later chapters, she starts to talk about how we are actually a collection of different identities, like you pointed out. There's the
Yeah.
identity of you as a well, no longer a student, a doctor, and your experience as a son, your experience as a musician, or not your experience,
Mhm.
but your identity as all these things, but also perhaps your identity based on your national origin or your identity based on various social groups you might belong to, and so on, and that these can come into conflict.
Mhm.
And then you have to figure out what how one identity can override another identity.
Right.
And that's going to be a theory of moral action.
Mhm. Mm.
Yeah. But that's the big picture. Once you have that in place, everything in chapter one makes sense.
Yeah.
Why she
Yeah.
spends so much time on all this stuff that doesn't seem immediately to have much relevance to moral theory.
Yeah.
What we take to be actual moral theory instead of something simplistic like the king decides what's right and wrong. Well, the king doesn't decide what's right and wrong. The king simply enforces the law.
Okay. Right. Right. So that's the also the difference between command and counsel, right? Because that part with the original texts, I was having a hard time with the language.
Mhm.
I think she brings in Hobbes
Oh, you
and
mean the 17th century English? You were having trouble with
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I think I understood what
Well,
counsel
yeah, in my outline, I have a little
is.
table where I laid that out. I don't know. It's on page four of the outline. You can probably find it kind of in the middle
Uh-huh.
of the page. Yeah,
Okay.
so I mean, counsel has more to do with determining the content of a
Right.
moral claim, whereas
Right.
command is the normative force.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
we haven't really split these things apart because we haven't really described um, why you can't get normative force out of counsel, why you
Uh-huh.
can't get normative force just out of the content of a moral claim,
Right.
that it needs to be something separate. I mean, maybe we should just go line by line because it is a
Sure.
fairly intricate argument.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to try to figure out why you can't get normative force from counsel?
We're still looking at that same page, right? For
Yeah,
normative.
it's maybe not that informative here because I just put these words down to remind myself of what's there.
Yeah.
Um, but why? Don't look at the table. I'll just say it this way.
Uh,
Let's just grant for right now that um, you get you get the content of a moral claim by reasoning about what is beneficial on some level.
okay.
Might be
Yeah.
on a social level. It might be on the level of you not wanting to lose your identity. It might
Mm-hmm.
be something more material than that. What is good is being able to feed yourself, et cetera, and so
Yeah.
on.
Right.
But none of those claims are normative.
Right.
Why aren't they normative? Why aren't they sufficient for normativity? And it has a lot to do with explanation and justification.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, in all those cases, it seems like it's you can explain, um, but when it, I don't know, like if you take an example, like killing is bad or something,
Mhm.
you can explain it away by saying it's not beneficial to the uh, species or yeah, or to the particular society and so on and so forth. But
And by the
when it
way,
comes down
one
to,
one response to that that shows that it's not normative is
mm,
that, you tell me, you can, it's bad to kill people because the economy is going to suffer, or it's bad to kill people for, because whatever, you might have an emotional response afterwards, and so on.
yeah,
But I can always, to all of those things, I can always say, so what?
right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So those are
and
all
so
descriptions. Those are all kind of like factual explanations, but they're not
yeah,
enough to get um, the normative gap, right? I mean,
right,
it's like what you were saying with like if you don't get punished, then what you did is not wrong,
Yeah.
right? There's
Yeah.
got to be, it could be, for instance, that as you were saying, that you can look at the situation and not find any further fact of the matter. It's wrongness, it's evil, or something like that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the content, because it's all prudential, that's the word you could use to describe that. It's or instrumental, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
instrumental um, in the following sense that you know it or hypothetical is the way Kant would say it. If you want X, then do Y.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not enough to show that X is right.
Mm.
Yeah. So you need some extra force there. And that's
Yeah.
why you need commands.
Right.
And it's really easy, and I find myself doing this a lot. It's really easy to conflate the command part of a normal claim, of a normative claim, and the counsel part, the content and
Yeah.
the normative force. The normative force is, uh, you know, just because it's not related, or how shall I say, just because it doesn't determine content, there is kind of a strong sense that there's something kind of formal about it. There's something kind of empty. It's like the empty force. It doesn't tell you what is right or wrong. It simply enforces what is right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's
And
that.
then she,
Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
and then she
Sorry.
goes through like how I forget who it is who placed that force in power, right? Um,
I'm
that
not
was
quite sure what you mean.
so.
You're
There's
talking
a
about,
whole part. I think it was Hobbes who was
yeah,
trying
yeah,
to.
Hobbes. That's what I've been talking about, Hobbes.
Right, right, right. But in the idea of power, and then she kind of
Mhm.
says like how that does not figure
Oh, you're
into
talking about irresistible power.
right.
Yeah, yeah. That's correct. The idea there is that it depends on what we mean by irresistible,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that it's possible to think of a situation. So, like, if by irresistible power you simply mean the power of the sovereign to punish,
Right.
then that's not enough to get a normative claim because it's possible that even though the sovereign can punish, there may be cases where the sovereign doesn't punish.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would have a situation where you might do something that the sovereign could punish, but doesn't. But if what you have decided is that that determines what is right or wrong, the capacity to punish, then you'll have a situation where as long as you're not punished, it's not wrong.
Yeah.
But if you have a situation where something is wrong only when it's punished, then you have a situation where you can't actually violate anything.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, something is wrong, an action is wrong only when it's punished. That means that it's a fact of the world that if you're punished, it's wrong. But there's no way to get this gap between something that is wrong that is not punished, right? You need to somehow be able to, uh, I mean, essentially what it is that it's kind of like looking at normativity in causal terms, right?
Mm.
Like you cannot violate the law of gravity. It's a fact of the matter that when I jump out of my window, I'll fall down or something like that. And if you're thinking about um, normativity in terms of the fact of punishment, then you can't get a situation where what you have done um, what you've done violates what actually is the case. Because the idea is that if what actually is the case is that you get punished and therefore the thing is wrong because you've been punished,
Mm-hmm.
then it's impossible to ever be wrong without the fact of the matter uh, corresponding to it. There's no gap between what is the case and what ought to be the case.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that I explained that in the best way, but I think that I don't know how much longer you want to go. It'd be good to meet on the first chapter again and just kind of go through the argument linearly.
Yeah.
We could do that for another 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so, or
Okay.
yeah, and then maybe we'll have a short meeting next time and just flesh it out. Yeah, let's just start at chapter one. And I mean, I put a lot of detail in here. It's only about 4 pages long, though, so it's, we've
Right.
talked a lot about it too. But she starts off with this secular view from the
Mm.
17th century, which is sort of interesting. I mean, I suppose it's useful to think about medieval theories of morality and the idea of divine command theory. I don't know if you've heard of that before, divine command theory. I
No.
mean, the simple version of that is that what makes an action right is that God commands it.
Mm.
And that's distinct from the voluntarist view. I mean, it's similar in some respects that uh, morality is bound up with commands. But the thing about divine command theory is that it's completely opaque. It's not transparent at all to us why God might think that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. What makes them right
Mm.
or wrong is whether God commands it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's
Yeah.
different here, where there is a distinction between the content of it being right or wrong, which you can arrive at through reason,
Right.
and the command part of it, which enforces that.
Right.
And what Grotius says is that moral obligations would exist even if God did not.
Hmm.
That we could get moral obligations without the authority, without the commander, because they're grounded in their practical value, their practical necessity for human society, human flourishing, and this kind of thing, right?
Right.
And then you get the objection that no, that's not enough for normativity, because
Mm.
it's just a fact of the matter that um, social utility helps a society thrive. It doesn't make it right. It just is a description of the facts.
Hmm.
So you need that gap to be able to violate what is the case in order for
Yeah.
it to be moral. So
Right.
that's why they say that, social utility is insufficient for obligation.
Hmm.
Morality requires some kind of authority to lay down the law.
Hmm.
Hobbes says that there is no inherent right or wrong in nature, which is a
Hmm.
fairly common scientific view, that
Yeah.
morality is a convention or an invention and not a natural reality.
Yeah.
But what Korsgaard says to that is that just because morality is a human invention does not mean that it's not real. It's
Right.
still real even though we invented it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
human belief in standards, human belief in moral standards, it may have biological roots. There may be some factual utility for survival,
Right.
for society, and so on. But belief alone doesn't establish obligation.
Right.
And here belief means like a theoretical belief, I think, right?
Hmm.
Like, an
Hmm.
explanation for why we act a certain way.
Yeah.
Actually, we should be more careful. An explanation that unpacks how we act, a description of how we act because of DNA, because of society, etc., isn't enough to give us obligation.
Yeah.
We need the why part of that, not just the how.
Hmm.
Is it clear what I'm distinguishing there between why and how? What it has to
Yeah.
do with
Yeah.
facts and
Yeah. The
values?
the explanation and justification. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So then we need to find what normative force is. We need to go on a search for normative force. What is normative force?
Right.
And she says that normative force is just the power of a moral claim to command, oblige, guide behavior.
Mm.
I think you could also add to that the ability of a moral claim to identify violations,
Right.
right?
And
Because without that, you can never violate what is the case.
yeah. Yeah.
And of course, this is going to be most salient when um, the violation of your moral standard involves some major self-sacrifice,
Right.
death, punishment, and so on. So, why is morality a source of motivation? How do we bridge that gap between ought and is? And then she gets
Mm-hmm.
into explanatory and normative adequacy. Do you want to exposit that a little bit? You want to say a couple words about explanatory versus normative adequacy? What's the difference between explanation, justification, um, and why explanatory theories of morality fail to explain why we act in certain ways?
Yeah.
Not how we act, but why we act.
Right. um, yeah, if we take, I don't know, like realism, for example, where they say there are intrinsically normative entities out there, and that alone um, is enough to, uh, you know, to tell us to act in a certain way and so on and so forth. That again, like it's just an explanation because you're saying, well, that's the way it is, and
Hmm.
it's this is inherently moral or whatever, but it still doesn't answer the question as to, well, why should I um, act in a
Hmm.
certain
Yeah, I
um,
mean, it comes down to this view that there can be a gap between what is and what ought to be. Because
yeah.
if there are such things out in the world called moral facts or normative facts, then one of the things she says is that it reduces ethics to epistemology. It's just sort
Mm-hmm.
of like a scientific or maybe mathematical, logical theory about what is the case.
Mm-hmm.
But even there, if even if there are moral facts, normative facts, then you can't get that gap between what is the case, moral facts exist, and what ought to be the case, moral facts should not be violated,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because it seems that if they are facts, then it just is what is the case, and you can't do otherwise than what is the case.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you still need justification.
Right.
One of the things she says about justification is that justification entails explanation. You
Mm.
can't justify without being able to explain,
Mm-hmm.
but the converse isn't true. If you've got
Mm-hmm.
explanation, you don't necessarily have a justification. You might just have a factual description, but not a
Right.
normative justificatory theory,
Right.
right? And so you do need explanation in order to have a theory of normativity, but you need to somehow add something to that. She sometimes talks about, I think it's Hobbes who says that value is super added to our theoretical picture of the world, our explanatory picture of the world. Maybe it's super added.
Right.
Maybe there's some way to derive justification from explanation. It seems like
Mm.
there's got to be some kind of gap, though, honestly,
Right.
between the content and the enforcement of the content, right?
Right.
But you need the content in
Yeah.
order to enforce it. You can't
Right.
enforce
Right.
something that's empty.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why justification still requires explanation. And
And then
justification here, yeah, go ahead.
no, and also with the chain of explanations, I guess with realists and yeah, like you reach a certain point or limit where you can't explain something anymore, and that's when it is like, oh, well, it is what it is, right? And that's it. You can't explain that further, and that's enough in and of itself.
Yeah, that's a realist position.
Right.
That's a lot of people have that basic position. The in the 20th century, the most famous person who defends that is G.E. Moore, that goodness is
Mhm.
somehow a primitive fact that you can keep asking why, and you remember Agrippa's trilemma, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
you can either go back infinitely asking why for some moral justification, or you
Hmm.
can say that it's somehow circular, or you can say that there's some first cause.
Yeah.
And that would be the theory that you keep asking until you just get to goodness, and you can't explain goodness any further. It's just like
Right.
a primitive fact.
Right.
Um, I forget why she says that that doesn't work. I had it in my mind a second ago, and now it's eluding me. But yeah, I mean that would be a realist position,
Yeah.
right? I suppose it's still subject to the same objection that if, well, actually, there are two things she says about it. Now I remember. One thing she says is that, well, if goodness is a primitive fact, then you still have the problem of not being able to explain the gap between is and ought,
Is
right?
not. Yeah.
There's no way to violate it if it's a fact. But maybe more than that, what she says, I think the more kind of easy to grasp objection she has is that, the realists always, um, I said it earlier today where I said something like, if you're a realist, you don't really give an explanation for your position, you just express your confidence
Mm.
in your
Mm-hmm.
position, right? That it's like, um, why should, for instance, God be the standard for ethics? It's just because you look for some way to stop Agrippa's trilemma and you choose, okay, first cause, and then you just put in whatever you wanted to put in there to begin with.
Right.
So maybe it's the good, maybe it's God, maybe it's some other thing that you take to be
Right.
some basic fact, but that doesn't actually establish that that's true. It just
Right.
establishes that it's an idea you like and you're confident in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's one objection to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe we can move on to the failure of naturalistic explanations, the
Mhm.
species versus individual situation, because this is actually, I think, kind of complicated.
Yeah.
We don't have a ton of time, but let's get through as much of this one as we can. What's going on here in this problem that she identifies? I mean, maybe you can sketch out the terms a little bit. This has to do with why should I? So first of all, the kind of naive evolutionary theory holds that morality, we have moral psychology because it benefits the species.
Yeah.
And then she says, well, why should I act in a way that benefits a species that produces the Nazis?
Right.
Okay, but what's going on here in this analysis, in this problem? You want to sketch it out a little bit more?
Yeah, it's I think it's boiling down from a third person perspective to a first
Mm-hmm.
person perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
also she says that like when someone poses that question, you want to give the benefit of doubt to them and you don't want to assume them as being like purposefully you know trying to like troll you or something, or you know what I mean, or with like they're asking that question with a
Uh,
bad conscience and
well, yeah, let's not worry about that yet because that she does talk about that here. I just want to sort of get the terms of the conflict in place, right? When she starts talking about the three conditions for normative adequacy, then she talks about the conflict between first and third personal points of view.
yeah.
But I want to stick with the species versus individual
Uh-huh.
conflict
Yeah.
here. Um, I'll just read what I have in my outline and then we can discuss it a little bit. So, I mean, obviously, sometimes you can get a conflict of interest on the evolutionary picture or on a naive evolutionary picture that holds that morality just comes out of a instinct for survival on a species level. Evolution can promote species survival at the cost of the individual members of the species.
Hmm.
And so, like a typical explanation for why parents sacrifice for their children is not that it's somehow metaphysically the right thing to do, it's just that it's part of this survival imperative. People
Yeah.
want their offspring to continue the species on some instinctual level, right?
Hmm.
And but there's a conflict between the interests of the parent as an individual and the interests of the species that is expressed in the proliferation of offspring,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So then you get this evaluative gap where evolution explains that individuals sacrifice for the species, but not why the species is worth sacrificing for.
Right.
Why preserve a species that produced the Nazis, for instance?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think it's important here to remember that, the species interests, it's not just that the interests of the species can compete with the interests of the individual in a zero-sum game, but rather that the interests of the species can directly threaten the survival of the individual,
Yeah.
right? And so, that is, I think, the more
Hmm.
salient thing here. It's not just that you try to balance your interest as an individual with your interest as a member of a species. Sometimes the species, if it's producing the Nazis that are trying to kill you, then
Hmm.
the interests of the species are completely
Against
contrary.
your.
Yeah, exactly. Completely against your own individual uh, interests. And so,
Mhm.
it produces, an evolutionary theory produces the possibility of self-undermining adaptations, right? An
Mm.
adaptation to further a species, but it might be a species that then develops an adaptation to destroy its individuals.
Yeah.
And so it'll be self-undermining, self-destructive, in which case moral adaptations might be counterproductive. If moral psychology is just an evolutionary adaptation, then it would be possible that there would be self-destructive morality.
Hmm.
If self-sacrifice preserves a group that is ultimately destructive, like the Nazis, the evolutionary adaptation undermines the very species it was meant to protect or to further, to make flourish.
Right.
So then biological reasons might be inadequate, right?
Yeah.
Here, reasons is an important term, right? Because
Mm.
when I'm saying that morality is a biological adaptation, I'm also saying moral reasoning is a biological adaptation.
Hmm.
But if my moral reasons are self-undermining, they're not reasons,
Yeah.
right? And so a biological theory of morality that undermines itself can't account for our ability to endorse because
Hmm.
it's possible that you could have biological reasons that are self-contradictory,
Right.
in which case they're not reasons.
Yeah.
If evolution were the only reason for morality, an individual might feel overwhelmed by moral urges while simultaneously finding the reason for those urges, that they're moral, to be rationally inadequate. In other
Right.
words, if I say, oh, you know what, I shouldn't kill that guy or I shouldn't steal that thing. And then if you think, man, I sure wish I didn't have this moral instinct,
Yeah.
then those moral instincts aren't reasons.
Yeah.
They're rationally inadequate. From the agent's point of view, so you have to consider not just the third personal species point of view, but also the point of view of the moral agent, how it looks from their perspective. From a first person point of view, an evolutionary explanation provides no justification. Without a deeper philosophical reason, you'd likely view your own moral instincts as a burden and wish you didn't have them, which means you couldn't possibly endorse them if you wish you didn't have them.
Yeah.
And if you think
Yeah.
that justification means endorsement, then an evolutionary theory in which it's possible that you view your moral instincts as a burden, as something you can't endorse, it can't be justification.
Justification. Right.
So then she suggests that I think it's reflexive endorsement, or is it reflective endorsement? Now I have to look that up. But in any case,
Yeah.
reflective endorsement, where that idea of, look, I act this way, I have these instincts.
Mm.
Sometimes I steal. Sometimes I have this moral instinct not to steal, even though I think I could get away with it. So why shouldn't I steal? Well, maybe the moral instinct is just evolutionary. It's in my DNA. But then I wouldn't be able to endorse it if I wish I didn't have that moral instinct.
Hmm.
So unlike some merely biological reflexes, like, oh, I see something I want, I take it.
Right.
Moral motivations have to survive the test of reflection.
Hmm.
In other words, after you've done it, you have to endorse whether it was good. whether you wish
Mhm.
you did it or whether you're happy that you did it or wish you didn't do it. That's what
Right.
it means to be moral. It means to survive that test of reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
they can't just be biological because it's
Yeah.
possible. It's not saying that all biological impulses are things we wouldn't affirm.
Mm-hmm.
She's saying that it's possible that if morality were just a biological instinct, it would be possible that we wouldn't affirm it, in which case it couldn't be moral because morality implies justification. Justification implies endorsement, and if you can't endorse it, then it's not moral.
Yeah. Right.
That's the argument there. It took me
Yeah.
an hour or so to unpack that. But the idea is
Mm-hmm.
essentially that, it gets back to that idea of self-undermining adaptations. It's totally coherent on an evolutionary theory to think that just by chance, some species develops an adaptation that ends up destroying the species.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's not a problem at all. In fact, that probably happens
Yeah.
quite a lot. Or maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly happens with respect to certain branches of a species or certain individual members or whatever, that there are certain adaptations that aren't fit for survival. And so evolution produces though, or the species maybe even produces those adaptations, but those adaptations destroy the species.
Yeah.
And because that's a possibility
Mm-hmm.
in biology, in evolution, it can't possibly be a justification because
Mm-hmm.
justifications can't be self-undermining if they're reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Is that clear?
They can't be self-undermining.
They can't. Reasons cannot
Right.
be self-under. In order for a reason to be self-undermining, I mean, that's equivalent to saying it's self-contradictory.
Yeah.
But a reason can't be self-contradictory. If a
Right.
reason is self-contradictory, it's not a reason.
Right.
It's confused, it's false, it's a paradox, but it's not a reason.
Right.
And so, therefore, biology is not adequate for explaining, or rather, it's not adequate for the justification part of morality. You
Mm-hmm.
might be able to explain moral psychology in terms of evolution, but that
Yeah.
doesn't give you the justification. It doesn't give you the force. Because it would
Right.
always be possible to say, man, I sure wish I didn't think it were wrong to steal.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
I automatically do think it's wrong to steal. And so therefore, I don't steal.
Don't steal. Right.
But
Yeah.
then that means you're not endorsing your
Mhm.
belief that it's wrong to steal. You're simply saying,
Yeah.
oh, it's a natural fact,
Yes.
and I wish I didn't have it.
Right.
But then
So in
it's not
order,
a justification.
uh-huh. So justification and endorsement are kind of going hand in hand, right?
Yeah. I
Right.
mean, this is kind of similar to Brandom because he also says that the way the Brandom talks about it is that, words like justification are kind of mysterious. They seem like they're somehow part of mental substance or something like that. And the reason that
Mm-hmm.
he replaces the word justification with endorsement is that endorsement has a a a public appearance. In other words, it's a certain set of activities that people do in a society.
Mm-hmm.
The way Rorty talks about justification or endorsement is endorsement is a way of describing a set of social practices that help people figure out what they're going to allow other people to get away with.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's so he says justification just means what others will let you get away with, what claims other people will let you get away with. That's what it
Mm-hmm.
means to justify. And so you can do a sociological analysis of what those rules are.
Yeah.
The public rules, sometimes they're implicit, sometimes people just kind of know because they're acculturated in a certain way. But not that there's anything sort of metaphysical or, mysteriously spiritual or, mental necessarily about justification. It's a social practice. And the main characteristic of it is that it is that aspect of social practice that determines whether or not people are going to let you get away with doing something or not doing
Mm-hmm.
something or claiming something or not claiming something. And that's what endorsement
Mm-hmm.
is, right? It's when you endorse, you say, I believe I should be allowed to get away with this. I
Yeah.
mean, putting it in that term, and those words makes it sound like it's bad. Like, because
Yeah.
getting away with something means you've done something bad and people aren't going to punish you.
Yeah.
But it could mean something more like, um, so like the way Branham talks about endorsement is that in addition to having the content of the belief, or
Mm,
rather, no, in addition to believing something, you also have the content of the belief, and then endorsement of the content of the belief means you say, "Hey, everybody, this is my belief. I affirm this. This is what
mm,
I want you to consider when you talk to me." And from that, I might draw certain other beliefs. I might be able to infer certain beliefs that are prior to it. So there's a sort of a chain of
mm,
inference. But endorsement simply means that capacity of social practice, um, or that aspect of social practice where people uh, interpret a set of rules basically to determine whether what you have done is something that the community can accept.
mm. Seems like it has the same force as law or something like that. Like when you
Yeah,
say
right.
I endorse, it's not just belief. The belief part is one, but then there's also this other thing that
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
yeah,
the
I
endorsement
endorse.
is yes, exactly. It's the public, celebration of the content.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, a couple things I would want to say there. I mean, it is also similar to the Hobbesian account, which is I just gave an external perspective of justification, where it's like it's whatever the community will let you get away with. But
Mm,
you also can internalize that,
mm,
right? That there are divisions of your own consciousness that act like a community.
yeah.
Right. Either, your own different identities or maybe even the collection of your identities at this time versus at some later time. Those are
Yeah.
communities that are in dialogue where,
Yeah.
you have to justify not just to other people, but also to the community of your own consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, that's why she's using endorse here quite a lot. Although she doesn't seem to have any problems with using the word justification either. I don't think
Yeah.
she's really a pragmatist in the way that, Rorty and Brandom are. With Rorty and Brandom, they're really skeptical of the whole, maybe like dualist picture of mental entities and this kind of thing. That what not
Mm-hmm.
that they think that they necessarily don't exist, but that you can always just explain mental entities in social terms.
Mm-hmm.
Right. She doesn't seem to have that commitment. She doesn't seem to have any problem with using terms that are often thought of as somehow more mental than
Right.
physical or something like that. But the basic aspect of a sort of public community
Mm,
is really important. Later on,
mm-hmm.
she defends some of her ideas by virtue of the private language argument or
Mm,
the critique of private language in Wittgenstein. And
mm,
it has the same basic shape that in order for meaning to be possible, meaning is normative, just like a moral claim is normative. But if it's normative, it means it can be wrong.
mm,
And in order for a meaning to be wrong, it has to be the sort of thing that a community can look at and say, yes, it means this, or no, it does not mean that. And that's the public aspect of it. If, for instance, I want just arbitrarily to say that this itch on my nose, I'm going to give it a proper name, Schlongor.
mm-hmm.
That itch is called Schlongor, and I just remember that Schlongor means that itch. In order for that word Schlongor to mean that itch, it has to be the sort of thing where, 5 minutes later, I think back on what Schlongor means and I can access, oh, it's that itch,
Mm,
which means that there's got to be this sort of community, in this
mm,
case, between different times of my own consciousness.
mm-hmm.
But if there's just a one-to-one sort of thing and Schlanger just means this and it's not available as a meaning to anybody else or even myself over time, then
Mm,
it's not a meaning.
mm-hmm.
It's just a sort of arbitrary correlation,
Yeah.
but not a meaning.
Right. I should probably get going. It's 11.
Yeah, I need to get going too. I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to meet in a week, we could flesh out the rest of this. I'd probably need
Yeah,
another,
next
yeah, so we could meet next week and then maybe 2 weeks after that. Because
chapter two.
with this seminar I'm teaching,
Oh
I need
yeah.
plenty of time to read that stuff. Um, by the way, the link that I gave you for the Canvas page, I'm posting the
Uh-huh.
videos on there if you want to watch them.
Ah, okay. Let me just make sure um I can see it right now. Because it's like a it's you share it as a public link, right?
I
As in
did,
I
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, cool.
And the video links are all just YouTube links, so you shouldn't have any trouble accessing them.
And these are recordings in the classroom,
Yeah,
or is it? Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay, I
It's
see.
all just the class sessions I'm putting out.
How interested are the students in any of this? Or do they do the readings and?
Well, I mean, we've only had one class, and so there weren't
Oh, I
any
see.
readings for that class. Excuse me. I think they're all interested. I mean, it's all
Cool.
basically the composition students plus an undergrad who asked for special permission, and
Okay.
then somebody who's probably a little too interested. I actually kind of hope she doesn't come, but we'll see. We'll see.
Oh,
She talks a lot. I don't know if she'll do the readings, but she talks a lot.
oh
Um,
man.
yeah, but they're all pretty interested. I mean, I think
Yeah.
none of them have any background really at all.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
that's fine. It's a challenge for me to present things in a,
Yeah.
like you know how on Wired magazine's YouTube channel, they always have those videos of 5 levels of explanation or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the stuff's pretty hard. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll see. I don't know if you looked at what we're doing, but
Yeah. No, I mean, there's yeah. It's. I wish you taught this class when I was still there.
yeah, well, I'll teach it again in the future. I mean, it's too bad you can't
Yeah,
come to the
my
class,
schedule.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
it conflicts with my schedule.
yeah.
But okay, maybe I can come in like uh, towards the end of the quarter if they're doing if anyone's doing like a presentation or if there's like a day
Yeah,
if they
well,
give reading.
we're doing readings all the way up to the last day, the last week of
Okay.
classes, and then presentations are, I mean, actually there are presentations during the class on
Mm.
like different philosophical topics, but the final presentations are in finals week in March, I guess.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, if you can, you've done some of these readings already. I think you did the Bergson
Yeah.
with me and Justin, I think, a couple years ago.
Right.
I understand some of the arguments better than I did back then for two reasons.
Yeah.
Well, not two reasons necessarily, because that was before the debate with Einstein. But oh
Mm-hmm.
my God, I have been reading lots and lots of physics and
Yeah.
relativity theory
Oh,
and
I
stuff
see.
to make
I
sure I
see.
understand what's going on there. But the
Yeah.
other thing that helps me understand Bergson's argument a little bit better was having read through No One's Ways,
Oh, yeah.
because I understand what he's going on about with rationalism there a little bit better, I think. I mean, he's not really
Mm-hmm.
clear. He just sort of name drops rationalism, but the idea that the self is somehow essentially related to the infinite judgment, this sort of
Mm-hmm.
negation in there. There's a sort of negative uh, aspect to the self on the rationalist picture. I think that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, I
And
see.
when we did it before, I thought that that's what he was talking about, but the only reference I had was Adorno, which was anachronistic. And now I know that I can talk about Maimon and
Oh,
Fichte
yeah.
and all these people.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
But
Graham Priest is someone I need to look into also.
yeah, he's an
Uh,
interesting guy. I mean, that book that I linked there is interesting. It's kind of
mm,
it's funny. I mean, it's kind of like this Korsgaard book. There are elements of it that seem like it's a good introduction for people with limited background, but like the first 3 pages are like that, and then you get to page 4, and it's like I don't understand a word.
oh, wow. Okay.
Because it's like, whenever you're a specialist in something, it's always hard
Yeah.
to figure out what is really obvious and what's not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I spent the summer getting good at modal logic, so
Uh-huh.
for the most part, modal logic and first order logic, and so it's for me, it's fairly straightforward. I don't know how the students are going to respond, but that's fine because part of my
Yeah.
job is to
Yeah.
make it easy to understand.
Right, right. He's got a book called In Contradiction, which explores.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've looked into that.
Well, right. I mean, he's famous for dialetheism, the
Mm,
idea that some contradictions, either that some contradictions are true, or at least that not all contradictions involve the principle of explosion. The
mm,
principle of explosion is just the idea that if you take a contradiction to be true, you can infer anything at all from that, anything you want.
mm.
So, like if I say that I am both talking to you right now and not talking to you right now, then
Yeah.
that implies that um, there is a kingdom of snakes on Mars. If the contradiction were true, then it's true that there's a kingdom of snakes on Mars.
Mm,
And
mm,
that's something that comes out of a particular understanding of how contradictions work. The reason
mhm.
that it works basically is that if I think that a contradiction is true as like a premise, and then underneath that premise, I assume whatever I want, that there is a
Uh-huh.
kingdom of snakes on Mars. I want to prove that there's a kingdom of snake on the Mars. All I have to do is assume there is no kingdom of snakes on Mars. And
Uh-huh.
then since there's a higher order premise or a more fundamental premise that is that some contradiction is true, I can import the contradiction underneath the negation of what I want to prove, which shows that the
Oh,
negation is false, and so therefore the negation of the
but
negation is true.
so the contradiction becomes true again if you take it below
Um,
the negation.
this would make more sense if you had a little bit of background in proof theory, but basically I'll just write it out like this on paper. Let's say that I assume that there's some true contradiction. Um,
Uh-huh.
and
Virtue
then
is quadrilateral.
well, that's not a
Yeah.
contradiction, that's a category.
Oh, that's right. That's yeah.
But then I say there are no snakes. And then since I, as a more fundamental premise, have a true contradiction, I can bring the contradiction in underneath the assumption,
Negation.
the negation, which then gives me. So it looks like this, basically. This is like in natural deduction, what it would look like. This little
Hmm.
upside down T means contradiction, and I've said that
Uh-huh.
it's true. Actually, is this backwards for you?
Uh, well, the
Or
T
does it
looks backwards,
it
or
looks
the
backwards?
T looks upside down.
Yeah, the T is upside down, but
Okay, it looks fine to me. Yeah.
is the S backwards or
No, it's fine.
oh, okay. On my image, it is backwards. But in any case, so let's say I have some fundamental assumption, some axiom or something that is a true
Okay.
contradiction. Then I can
Uh-huh.
assume whatever I want. There are no
Okay.
snakes on Mars. And
Uh-huh.
since this was a more fundamental assumption or premise, right? This is an
Mhm.
axiom of my system. Then I can say, well, that axiom applies to all propositions I would have. And so I can say that that's down here. But since this is a contradiction of that, I can infer that S is true because I had
Mm,
not S um, is essentially justified by a contradiction,
mm,
or is not. I mean, not S is going to be contradict, or not S is going to be false because it entails a contradiction, because a
uh-huh.
contradiction is an axiom.
Yeah.
And so then I can prove that S
S is
is
true.
true. There are snakes on the
Mm.
moon. But I could do the same thing here too. I could put S here.
Oh, and then
Um,
get the not
assume
S.
S, derive a contradiction, show that not S is true.
I see.
That's the principle of explosion. The idea that if you have like, if you take that some contradiction is true, then you can infer anything you want,
Yeah.
right? And what Graham Priest denies is that contradiction entails explosion.
Mm,
And that's the way he's able to keep contradictions in his system
mm.
because he says that you can't just infer whatever you want from contradictions.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's basically the idea. But in any case,
Yeah.
ooh,
Mm.
yeah. All right. Well, I'll see you in a week. We'll try
Yeah.
to
Okay.
maybe just spend 1 hour on the last half of that,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
then in 3 weeks we can work on chapter 2, I guess.
Two. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks,
All
Scott.
right. I'll see you. Yeah. Take
All
care.
right. Bye bye.